I need you to understand one thing. If Amazon can cut 14,000 jobs 62 days before Christmas, what makes you think that your job would not cut you?
Massive job cuts at Amazon. Overnight, the company announcing it'll eliminate approximately 14,000 roles. This is the largest corporate layoff of the year.
Layoffs intensify across companies. Google parent Alphabet has now announced that it is planning to cut roughly 12,000 jobs.
CEO Elon Musk posting a statement on the website saying they're laying off 7% of their full-time workers. It's all in an effort to cut the cost and increase.
America woke up to a nightmare it never imagined. In a single week, three of its biggest tech giants, Amazon, Google, and Tesla, announced a staggering 120,000 layoffs. Entire teams vanished. Billion-dollar projects froze overnight. The country that once defined global innovation suddenly found its tech empire cracking under pressure. But the real shock wasn't the layoffs themselves. It was who stood to benefit as the U.S. crisis grew deeper. Across the ocean, Africa was rising with unprecedented momentum.
Amazon just quietly revealed the future of work, and it does not include you. Amazon is laying off 30,000 people right before its busiest season. But here's the real story. Leaked internal documents show that this isn't just downsizing, it is replacement. What's Amazon's new plan, you ask? Avoid hiring 600,000 new jobs by 2033. Using mass automation with AI and robotics, as well as hiring freezes to do so. By 2027, they expect to cut 160,000
new tech corridors, digital free trade zones, AI labs, robotics hubs, and manufacturing giants were expanding faster than the world could track. While America was shutting down departments, Africa was opening new research centers. While U.S. workers packed their desks, African cities were welcoming global talent with open arms. And while American innovation slowed, Africa's growth was accelerating like never before. What the world saw as an American collapse, Africa saw as an opportunity, a historic shift in global power. Investors moved their money, companies shifted their operations, startups migrated, and suddenly, Africa became the world's newest magnet for innovation, manufacturing, and digital transformation. America was losing its grip, Africa was claiming its moment, and the fall of 120,000 U.S. tech workers was only the beginning of a much bigger story.
35% of Google managers are gone. Guess micromanagement wasn't scalable. So at the recent town hall, guys, Google has announced that it is going to eliminate 35% of its middle management teams. And this brings up the discussion that all of us need to have about how many people can one person effectively manage. Now, I've been managing people since I had a full head of hair and it wasn't white.
To the CEO of Amazon, telling the company's employees that some of their jobs will be replaced by AI and that Amazon's workforce is expected to shrink in the coming years as AI's role expands.
14,000 workers left Tesla today. There was a layoff, 10% of the workforce gone.
The news broke before sunrise across the United States, but by noon it had spread around the world. Three of America's largest tech giants had announced the largest mass layoff in their histories. Amazon, Google, and Tesla, companies once seen as untouchable, confirmed a combined 120,000 job cuts. The reason was simple, yet devastating: shrinking profits, collapsing margins, and the rapid shift of global innovation away from Silicon Valley toward Africa. For years, the U.S. ignored the warning signs. Analysts had cautioned that over-reliance on foreign minerals, rising operational costs, and stiff competition would eventually force the American tech sector to restructure, but no one expected the restructuring to begin with a single massive blow that would erase entire divisions overnight. Inside tech campuses from California to Texas, the atmosphere flipped from busy and electrified to eerily silent. Parking lots emptied, cafeterias went quiet, security badges stopped working as thousands of workers realized their careers had evaporated in an instant. Some employees had been in these companies for over a decade. Others had joined only months earlier, believing they were stepping into the future of global technology. But the future had moved elsewhere across Africa. That future was rising quickly. In countries like Kenya, Ghana, Rwanda, Egypt, and South Africa, new digital corridors were opening every quarter. Tech parks were expanding at a rate that stunned global economists. African cloud infrastructure firms were securing major international contracts. Indigenous AI platforms were surpassing expectations, and a new wave of clean tech and manufacturing hubs was drawing in talent from across the continent. Foreign investors who once competed desperately to be in Silicon Valley were now flying to Nairobi, Accra, Kigali, and Johannesburg. What shocked many was how prepared Africa had become. The continent was no longer positioning itself as an outsourcing destination. It was building original systems, original technology, and original industries. Africa was no longer waiting to be integrated into global innovation. It was creating its own. The shift had been building for years, but the final push came when various African countries united under a set of digital and manufacturing agreements that prioritized skills development, advanced tech education, and homegrown innovation, with improved infrastructure, broadband expansion, and new manufacturing plants producing everything. From smartphones to EV components, Africa established itself as the world's next major tech frontier. And U.S. companies felt the impact directly. The cost of running massive operations across the United States had skyrocketed, energy costs increased, labor costs surged, regulatory pressures stiffened. Meanwhile, Africa had created economic zones designed for innovation, offering fair taxation, state-of-the-art energy systems, and talent pipelines built specifically for technology companies. International firms looking for new growth were turning their attention toward African markets and away from America. The U.S. government attempted to reassure the public, insisting the layoffs were temporary adjustments. But industry analysts saw the deeper problem. America's tech infrastructure was struggling to adapt to global competition. While African nations were building renewable power grids to support data centers and industrial facilities, U.S. corporations were battling outdated systems and rising maintenance costs. It wasn't just internal pressure. The global supply chain had shifted dramatically after the strategic moves made by Africa and Canada in minerals and battery technology. Those changes reverberated throughout Silicon Valley. Without access to low-cost materials, production expenses soared for American tech companies. Prices of servers, processors, and clean energy components rose sharply. Tesla faced enormous challenges as battery costs climbed. Google's data center expansion slowed. Amazon's cloud hardware procurement became unpredictable. The layoffs were not a reaction to a temporary slowdown. They were a response to a fundamental restructuring of global power. Meanwhile, African nations were not merely benefiting passively, they were accelerating. New computer science institutions were graduating tens of thousands of engineers each year. Cross-border tech initiatives were creating seamless digital markets. African fintech platforms were expanding internationally with groundbreaking systems that bypassed traditional banking structures. Drone logistics networks were revolutionizing deliveries in East Africa. Solar-powered microgrids were providing stable electricity for tech hubs, and Africa's manufacturing sector was beginning to rival parts of Asia in cost efficiency and speed. At the same time, African youth were embracing entrepreneurship on an unprecedented scale. Africa was becoming one of the most dynamic innovation ecosystems in the world. While the United States was losing 120,000 skilled workers overnight, Africa was hiring fast. Companies from Europe and Asia were relocating development teams to African cities. The perception of global tech leadership was changing. Silicon Valley had long been the center of innovation, but now it was Africa that buzzed with momentum, energy, and relentless forward motion. Meanwhile, American cities felt the economic shockwaves. Restaurants, stores, and small businesses near tech campuses saw customer traffic plummet. Local housing markets shifted downward. Entire neighborhoods that once depended on tech salaries faced new uncertainty. In Washington, policymakers scrambled to devise a plan to stabilize the tech workforce. Proposals for subsidies, tax relief, and innovation incentives were rushed into debate, but experts warned that unless the U.S. addressed deeper structural issues, its declining manufacturing base, its costly infrastructure, its overdependence on foreign minerals, and its outdated education systems, the layoffs would be only the first wave of a much larger crisis. Africa, on the other hand, projected confidence. Leaders across the continent emphasized that their growth was not built on exploiting foreign weakness, but on finally exercising the full potential that had always existed. They welcomed global tech shifts not as a temporary opportunity, but as a permanent repositioning of Africa's role in the future. And while America grappled with layoffs, Africa prepared for expansion. The world was watching, and one reality became undeniable: the U.S. tech crisis was deepening. Africa's rise was accelerating, and 120,000 American job losses were only the beginning of a much larger story. As America struggled to absorb the shock of the layoffs, another wave of headlines swept across global networks. Africa had just announced its largest ever tech integration project, linking 7 major innovation corridors across East, West, Central, and Southern regions. The timing was no coincidence. Africa understood the global moment perfectly, and it was moving with intention, precision, and speed. In Nairobi, a massive new data processing complex began onboarding engineers. In Lagos, a high-speed digital manufacturing plant launched its first production cycle. In Johannesburg, a new AI robotics lab opened its recruitment portal and received 20,000 applications within the first hour. These weren't symbolic projects. They were pillars of a rising Continental blueprint designed to absorb the massive global shift in tech talent and investment. Meanwhile, in the United States, the situation was unraveling far faster than leaders expected. The layoffs had triggered a chain reaction across the American economy. Suppliers dependent on Amazon's cloud systems reported contract delays. Marketing agencies tied to Google's ad revenue scrambled as budgets froze. Electric vehicle supply partners linked to Tesla halted operations entirely, waiting for clarity on future orders. What began as 120,000 layoffs now put nearly 500,000 secondary jobs at risk. The stock market reacted brutally. Technology indexes staggered, venture capital slowed to a crawl, and prophecies once dismissed as doom predictions suddenly became reality. Commentators on morning news segments openly questioned whether the U.S. had accidentally allowed itself to fall behind in the global innovation race. The answer was becoming clearer with each passing month. Africa was accelerating while the United States was struggling to adapt. Across the Atlantic, African nations were welcoming the moment with a confidence the world had rarely seen. Universities expanded tech programs, governments launched new policies to protect and nurture startups. Public-private partnerships grew rapidly, supported by strong continental strategies that prioritized digital trade, local manufacturing, and cross-border talent mobility. African youth, who made up the majority of the continent's population, surged into the new opportunities. Coding boot camps filled to capacity, robotics clubs doubled in size, virtual design studios led by young African developers began gaining global traction. Innovation festivals, once modest gatherings, were now drawing thousands of investors, engineers, and researchers from around the world. What made Africa's rise so unstoppable was not just the influx of attention, it was the continent's unity. For decades, Africa had been treated as a fragmented collection of markets, but a new generation of leaders approached growth differently. They saw strength in collaboration. They saw power in integration. They understood that by acting together, Africa could compete not as individual nations, but as a continental force. The newly established digital free trade corridors allowed African startups to instantly scale across multiple regions without the usual bureaucracy that slowed businesses in other parts of the world. A fintech startup founded in Dakar could reach millions of users in Nairobi, Kigali, and Johannesburg within weeks. Manufacturing. The zones in North Africa coordinated with energy hubs in Southern Africa and logistics platforms in West Africa. In contrast, the United States was facing fragmentation. States disagreed on tech regulations. Federal and local policies clashed. Tech firms found it increasingly difficult to navigate the shifting political landscape. Some states welcomed innovation, while others imposed strict rules that discouraged experimentation. The once unified tech ecosystem of Silicon Valley was fracturing as companies relocated in search of lower costs, friendlier laws, and less political noise. Then came the turning point. Africa announced the launch of the Global Tech Relocation Program, aimed specifically at workers affected by international layoffs. The program offered relocation packages, tax incentives, housing support, and tailored work permits for highly skilled workers, while the initiative welcomed global talent. Broadly, its indirect impact on America was obvious. Thousands of laid-off U.S. workers saw Africa not as a distant concept but as a genuine opportunity. Within days, applications flooded in from former Amazon engineers, Google researchers, Tesla designers, and countless other specialists. What shocked analysts most was how many Americans expressed excitement about the prospect of working in Africa rather than hesitation. Many saw it as a chance to join a growing ecosystem instead of remaining in a United States struggling with tech uncertainty. Private African firms capitalized immediately. Job fairs hosted in Accra, Nairobi, and Kigali sold out. Virtual recruitment events targeted international talent. High-growth African companies began attracting the kind of expertise that once flowed exclusively to Silicon Valley. Meanwhile, African professionals were rising to global prominence. They were no longer being hired as support staff or outsourced labor. They were becoming founders, innovators, and builders in their own right. A new generation of African CEOs was emerging, and they carried a shared ambition to build Africa-driven technology ecosystems that could compete globally. Back in the United States, reality began sinking in. Congressional hearings were held to address the crisis, with experts warning that the country was at risk of losing technological dominance. Tech executives pushed for reforms to reduce operational costs and improve access to minerals and manufacturing, but progress was slow. Political disagreements stalled proposals. Economic pressures continued mounting. Meanwhile, the African investment climate became one of the hottest topics on global financial networks. International companies that had once spent billions in U.S. tech markets began redirecting their funds toward African infrastructure, manufacturing, and digital services. For the first time, the world saw Africa not as a supplier of raw materials, but as the new epicenter of technological expansion. This global shift did not go unnoticed within China, India, or Europe either. China doubled its investments in African digital systems. India sought partnerships in software and telecommunications. Europe, concerned about losing influence, began offering new trade agreements with African economic blocs. Africa had become the center of the world's attention, and the world was responding. In this rapidly shifting landscape, the United States found itself confronting a truth it had long denied. It no longer held a monopoly on innovation, talent, or economic dominance. Other regions, especially Africa, were rising swiftly, efficiently, and boldly. And while the U.S. was losing 120,000 jobs at its tech giants, Africa was creating millions of jobs in coding, robotics, manufacturing, digital trade, fintech, cloud computing, agriculture tech, and renewable energy. The continent was transforming into a global supercompetitor, using both its demographic strength and its growing economic influence. By the time economists finally understood the scale of the shift, it was too late to ignore. America was in crisis, Africa was rising, and the global landscape would never be the same again.